They said the first breath of a revolution is silent, but Ducati just proved them wrong. In the dim glow of a closed-door testing bay, a machine no one was supposed to see yet growled awake for the first time. The GP27, the very first 8-ohm-cc creature built for a MotoGP universe that doesn't exist yet. And standing in front of it wasn't a world champion, nor a veteran carved by decades of Grand Prix warfare. It was Nicolò Bulega, a rider who until yesterday was defined by a different paddock, now chosen to decode the most volatile prototype Ducati has created since the Desmo Sedeschi's birth. Because something happened the moment Bulega touched that bike. Engineers swear the telemetry spiked in patterns they had never recorded, as if man and machine recognized each other before they even moved. The Pirelli carcass flexed differently under him. The chassis breathed in ways only he could interpret, and his very first outlap revealed a secret Ducati had kept buried. This motorcycle isn't just a prototype. It's the beginning of a new species. And yet, the question that grips the paddock is the one no one can answer. Why Bulega? Why now? And what did Ducati see in him that convinced them to hand over the keys to the future? Because if the rumors are true, then this quiet, focused rider may have just become the most important variable in MotoGP's next era, and the only man capable of taming Ducati's first 850cc monster. MotoGP approaches its 850cc dawn like a world holding its breath, and engineers whisper that this is the first time in decades the sport feels genuinely unpredictable. The rules slash aerodynamics so brutally that even wind tunnel baselines must be redrawn from scratch, destabilizing every assumption teams once treated as law. Riders quietly admit the ban on ride height devices removes their most trusted escape rope during corner exit, forcing a purity of technique many hadn't practiced in years. The future has to be built early, intelligently, and with absolute precision, Ducati repeats in the garage, as if turning the phrase into a heartbeat. Inside one rider's mind flickers a private confession. What if the bike I knew no longer knows me back? A little-known technical note circulates that Pirelli's construction flexes differently after sustained lean, altering feedback timing by fractions of a second that change everything. Journalists describe the transition as historic, but inside the paddock, it feels more like stepping onto a floor that shifts beneath each step. Ducati's engineers stare at racks of discarded wings like archaeologists cataloging an extinct creature. Teams now study airflow not as a weapon, but as a delicate companion that must be courted, not dominated. The 850cc engines promise less violence but more complexity, demanding a finesse many fear they've forgotten. Test riders speak softly about torque curves that rise like tides, slow, deceptive, unstoppable once they crest. The Michelin to Pirelli swap haunts every conversation because tire memory built over a decade is about to evaporate in a single winter. Some mechanics compare the new rules to learning to write again with unfamiliar hands. Others say it feels like chasing a horizon that keeps moving just as you think you've reached it. Ducati watches all this with an intensity bordering on reverence, knowing resets of this magnitude are invitations for dynasties to rise or collapse. The paddock senses that the 2027 bike will not be an evolution, but a rebirth. Gigi Dall'Igna studies data with the calm of someone reading the future hidden between numbers. Engineers swear they feel electricity in the air when the prototype frame is lifted onto the stand. The atmosphere thickens with both fear and promise, stitched together like two colors in the same flame. Each brand prepares to unlearn, relearn, and rebuild everything they thought they mastered. And in this fragile silence before the storm, MotoGP realizes it is standing not at the edge of a chapter, but at the edge of an era. And eras only begin once someone is brave enough to turn the page. Ducati moves toward 2027 with the quiet confidence of those who have already seen the future and begun shaping it long before anyone else dared to. The GP27 prototype, months ahead of its rivals, sits in a locked workshop like a secret, waiting for the right moment to breathe. Gigi Dall'Igna walks through those corridors with the serenity of a man whose philosophy has never wavered. Build success before the world realizes it is possible. His mantra echoes daily. Success must be engineered before the regulations arrive, turning the factory into a cathedral of relentless preparation. Inside Bulega's mind, a private thrill flickers. If they chose me this early, maybe they're trusting something I haven't even proven yet. Few know that Ducati has already simulated over 300 hours of 850cc thermal load behavior, mapping chassis stress that other teams haven't even begun to model. Mechanics say the GP27 doesn't feel like a prototype, but like the first page of a book already half-written. The meetings between Bulega, his manager, and Gigi's were not casual. They were strategic, precise, almost prophetic. Gigi believes I can be good for the 850cc era, Bulega admitted, revealing a door that had been quietly opening behind the scenes. Engineers described the new frame as breathing differently, expanding in micro-patterns only detectable with high-resolution laser strain sensors. The atmosphere at Borgo Panigale pulses with a sense of acceleration no stopwatch can measure. Every early decision feels like planting seeds in soil no one else has tested yet. The factory nights grow longer, but no one complains because progress has become a kind of addiction. Ducati studies the new rules the way astronomers study distant stars, searching for signals others overlook. Bulega senses he is being woven into the fabric of something vast, something that transcends one rider or one machine. The test team whispers that the 850cc engine sounds unlike anything Ducati has built before, sharper, clearer, almost impatient. Gigi's notebooks, covered in equations and tiny sketches, circulate like sacred manuscripts. Rivals try to guess how far ahead Ducati truly is, but even insiders say the margin is measured in months, not steps. And as the GP27 waits for its first full breath of asphalt, Ducati realizes it has already crossed a threshold because some revolutions begin quietly, long before the world recognizes their sound. April 2026 will open like a curtain rising on a stage that only Michel Pirro truly knows how to walk across. He will debut the 850cc GP27 with the calm precision of a man who has carried every Desmosedici generation in his muscle memory. Ducati chose him because his understanding of the bike's evolution is not theoretical. It is lived, breathed, and etched into thousands of test laps. Engineers often say that Pirro doesn't ride the Ducati, he converses with it. A quiet thought slips through his mind. After all these years, am I ready to build its next soul? What few outside the factory know is that Pirro has been studying a new torsional flex pattern in the GP27's frame, a micro-adjustment that changes stability under prolonged load. My role is to give the bike its first truth, he told a technician during a late-night shakedown. He approaches this mission with the gravity of someone entrusted with shaping the skeleton of a future champion. Test crews describe his feedback as frighteningly specific, noting vibrations others cannot detect. The GP27 responds to him like a violin tuned by its only master. Every evolution of the Desmosedici resides in his memory as clearly as tracks on an old vinyl record. Ducati trusts that memory to anchor a motorcycle that must obey new rules, yet still carry Ducati's identity. The 850cc power delivery feels unfamiliar, almost shy, but Pirro knows how to coax its intentions into clarity. His first laps will not chase speed. They will chase understanding. The chassis will speak, the electronics will whisper, and Pirro will translate every nuance into engineering choices that others will later refine. In these early moments, he becomes both architect and interpreter. Pirro knows the responsibility is immense, yet he carries it with a craftsman's pride. His job is to define what the GP27 is before anyone else decides what it could be. And when the April sun hits the fairing for the first time, Pirro will begin a story only he can write, because every era starts with a hand steady enough to draw its first line. Nicolò Bulega steps into Ducati's future with the precision of a man whose instincts align perfectly with what the next era demands. After Pirro lays the foundation, it is Bulega who must give the GP27 its breathing rhythm, shaping the way the bike behaves under the new Pirelli philosophy. His mastery of tire feel is so sharp that engineers joke he can sense temperature shifts before the sensors register them. He admits openly, "I really like Pirelli tires. My riding style is good for the Pirelli. When I heard they were coming to MotoGP, my idea to come back was even stronger." A quiet thought crosses his mind. Maybe this is the moment where everything I learned in superbikes becomes the key they didn't know they needed. Few know that Pirelli's carcass construction reacts with a subtle lateral flex at lean angles above 55 degrees, a detail Bulega interprets like a second language. Ducati sees this not as coincidence, but as destiny shaped by technique. His debut on the GP27 will arrive in June 2026, a date that feels less like a test and more like an unveiling. The team has already prepared a specific electronics map just for him, tuned to exaggerate tire behavior so he can read it more clearly. They need his sensitivity, his precision, his way of listening to grip as if it were a living creature. Bulega walks through the garage with the calm tension of someone standing between two worlds. Superbike identity behind him, MotoGP possibility in front. Each of his 3 guaranteed test outings will not chase lap time, but truth. Engineers say his notes often reveal contradictions that later turn into breakthroughs. His feedback meetings stretch late into the night, filled with silence, numbers, and sudden sparks of clarity. Ducati trusts that he can polish what Pirro creates, refining rough edges into competitive sharpness. The GP27 in his hands becomes clay warmed by experience and reshaped by intuition. He senses the weight of expectation, but welcomes it as if it were an old friend. And when the test lights turn green in June, Bulega will not simply accelerate, he will begin sculpting Ducati's next heartbeat. Nicolò Bulega enters 2026 carrying a workload so immense it bends the calendar around him. He will chase a WorldSBK title with the relentlessness of a man who knows the clock is ticking louder every season. At the same time, he will stand as Ducati's MotoGP reserve, a role that requires both readiness and restraint. His third responsibility, testing and refining the GP27, demands a depth of focus most riders never experience in an entire career. He sums it up with disarming clarity. I will be busy next year because Superbike and then as a MotoGP test rider with the new regulations bike. A quiet thought flashes through his mind. Can one season hold this much of me without breaking something? Few know that Ducati has designed a dual telemetry bridge allowing engineers to compare his Superbike data with his MotoGP test laps in near real time, a technological experiment as daring as his schedule. Each discipline pulls at him differently, shaping him like tides shaping stone. His Superbike commitments ask for aggression carved with precision. His MotoGP duties require reflection, sharpened by intuition. The contrast forces his brain to switch riding languages day by day, sometimes hour by hour. Engineers describe him as living in 2 universes simultaneously. The tension between them becomes a kind of music, unpredictable yet strangely harmonious. Ducati sees beyond the chaos and recognizes a strategic masterpiece forming. Bulega becomes the hinge on which their entire 850cc future quietly turns. His exhaustion, though real, transforms into fuel whenever he steps onto a bike. There is beauty in juggling impossible responsibilities when each one holds the promise of rewriting a chapter in racing history. This workload is not a burden, but a crucible, burning away doubt and forging something new. And as 2026 begins, Bulega realizes that carrying 3 dreams at once is not madness. It is destiny knocking 3 times on the same door. Marc Marquez waits for the GP27, not as a rider receiving a new machine, but as an artist preparing to reclaim a canvas he once dominated. Ducati is already sculpting the bike around his deepest strengths, brutal braking precision, that uncanny corner entry instinct, and a feel for the front end that seems woven into his DNA. Engineers whisper that Pirelli's front tire, with its slightly slower collapse rate under deceleration, could reawaken sensations Marquez hasn't felt since before his injury. Bulega sensed this connection too, remarking, "In Superbike, the Pirelli front gives you a lot of good feeling. In MotoGP, you have to ride a little bit different, but he has incredible talent, so I think he can adapt very well." A fleeting doubt crosses Marquez's mind. Will the bike meet me halfway, or must I chase it into the unknown once again? What few outsiders know is that Ducati has built a prototype brake pressure algorithm that adjusts microdynamically to his signature late-entry load spikes. The engineers treat these spikes like rare seismic events, dangerous, unpredictable, but capable of reshaping everything around them. Marquez walks through the garage with a quiet gravity, aware that a machine built for him carries expectations as sharp as scalpels. Each tweak of the chassis is meant to echo his past while inviting a new version of his future. The GP27 becomes a mirror, reflecting who he was and who he must become. Bulega's early comments were not flattery. They were warnings wrapped in admiration. The transition from Michelin feel to Pirelli intuition demands courage disguised as finesse. Marquez embraces that challenge with the thrill of someone tasting the possibility of rebirth. Ducati knows that when the front speaks, he listens with almost supernatural clarity. This synergy becomes the axis on which the entire project spins. The paddock senses the tension, like a string pulled so tight it vibrates before it sings. Every element of the GP27 bends toward one question. Can it unleash the rider Marquez once was and the rider he still might be? And when he finally leans into that first corner with the Pirelli front humming beneath him, the sport will hold its breath. Because some comebacks don't arrive, they ignite. Ducati's obsession with 2027 surfaced unmistakably during the Valencia test, where a strange device appeared on only one bike, Bulega's. The unit looked fragile, almost improvised, yet its purpose was anything but simple, measuring microscopic pressure shifts that would define aerodynamics in a world without ride height devices. Crash.net specialists revealed the theory behind it, suggesting it mapped variations in air behavior across the fairing at speeds no human instinct could interpret alone. Mechanics watched Bulega roll out of the garage with an intensity usually reserved for race starts. A quiet thought pulsed through him. Why me? Why now? And what exactly are they preparing me to become? Inside the device hid a little-known sensor capable of sampling airflow oscillations at over 1,200 readings per second, a number that stunned even veteran engineers. Ducati's trust was implicit, carved not through words, but through responsibility handed directly into his gloves. Some teams observed curiously, unable to decipher whether this was innovation or provocation. Others whispered that Ducati was already living one season ahead of everyone else. The data streamed into laptops like a secret language only a few could read. One technician murmured, "This will matter more in 2 years than it does today." And the room fell into a thoughtful silence. Bulega felt the weight of a future that hadn't arrived yet pressing gently onto his shoulders. The bike behaved differently with the prongs attached, humming with unfamiliar tension. Every lap became a dialogue between present and future, between rules still inked on paper and forces already reshaping the sport. Ducati didn't ask him to go faster, they asked him to go deeper. The test transformed the track into a laboratory, the rider into a translator, the device into a prophecy. No factory rider touched this experiment, a decision that spoke louder than any announcement. And as Bulega returned to the garage with data that would outlive the season, Ducati understood something vital had begun, because sometimes the smallest instrument reveals the largest revolution. Ducati stands at the threshold of a generational shift, a moment where the echoes of the 1000cc era begin to fade and new voices prepare to rise. Rumors of Davide Tardozzi's retirement at the end of 2026 drift through the paddock like the final notes of a familiar song. His departure would mark the symbolic closing of a chapter that shaped Ducati's modern identity. Into that widening space steps Michel Pirro, the rider who carries the brand's technical DNA with unmatched clarity. A quiet thought stirs in him. After so many years guiding the bike, am I now meant to guide the team? Few know that Pirro has already been trained in Ducati's predictive simulation suite, a system normally reserved for high-level engineers. His leadership path has been woven slowly, deliberately, like threads pulled tight across a loom. Ducati sees him not merely transitioning roles, but transforming the organization's heartbeat. Bulega, meanwhile, begins taking on heavier testing duties, absorbing responsibilities once distributed across entire departments. This pairing, Pirro rising, Bulega expanding, forms the spine of what insiders call Ducati 2.0. The shift feels less like restructuring and more like evolution unfolding in real time. One engineer remarked quietly, "It's natural. Pirro understands how the bike thinks." The factory senses the future moving toward them, with both urgency and grace. Tardozzi watches this with the pride of someone who recognizes continuity in capable hands. Each meeting, each debrief, carries an undertone of transition. Bulega, though young, shows a maturity sharpened by the weight of the GP27 project. Pirro, already half in the managerial role, guides with calm authority. Together, they embody Ducati's next balance of wisdoms and ambition. And as the 850cc era approaches, the team realizes leadership is not merely passed. It is inherited, cultivated, and finally earned, like a flame carried carefully into a new dawn.